Cinphomaniac is full of spoilers. If the movie's there in the title, we're probably gonna say everything that happens in it.
We could start one of two places. We could start either just with like the Obi-Wan those two, or just like go into a little bit of like some of what they announced at Celebration, because like honestly, that talking about that stuff is very interesting to me, because it's kind of like for the first time really since we've been doing this show, there's now like a sense of like, and this is very intentional, I think. There's now a sense of like, oh, Star Wars is kind of like back. Because it was, it's been kind of in a.
Well, I think we were oversaturated for a minute. It's not we, like the proverbial we, not myself. I'm not saturated. I'll take it. I'll take as much as I can get. But I do think there was a bit of like maybe Gen X being like, oh, I'm over this. There's too much of it. I'm into different stuff. And I feel like this is kind of bringing that group back a little bit.
I think it is.
So
and
we'll
I've
see.
even seen some reactions from specific people that would definitely fit into your Gen X category of people have their guard up for, to some extent, good reason, though I was always confident the show is going to be like really exciting. And so far it is, though, like I definitely still have some things in the back of my mind where I'm like, okay, this is going to be tricky to stick the landing on some of them. Nevertheless, and Star Wars fans, as we know, are like the most fickle of all. And, I think it's been good to watch I don't really care too much about like what older people are thinking, but you're right. I think I've already seen some of them like now crawl back because they're like, oh, this is actually good. And I am into this. Then there's like the whole sort of prequel generation, which is kind of more ours. And I think these people have been the most excited about the show. And there's a sort of a flip side that's unfortunate, which I think has been inevitable the whole time, unfortunately, which is like that while the show has been like overall, I think very well received, like there is still that core Star Wars thing of like, now is there a certain incessant kind of nitpicking and fear mongering about like, this is totally going to fuck it up, or this is going to fuck this up, or this is going to fuck this up. But then you add on to that the layer of like what's kind of unfortunately been happening over like the last 5-6 years since the Force Awakens, and then definitely The Last Jedi came out, which is like this kind of like there's a sort of just a Star Wars kind of like sensitivity that then funnels into like outright like hate and a certain type of like reactionary politics. And it's this sort of interconnected sort of web of the dark side, if anything. I mean, that's the sick irony of it. I've heard a lot of people give
the dark side
like
of
that.
the
Yeah,
fandom.
it's like how could you like Star Wars, but then not even. I'm like, dude, because that's how people are. And if anything, it speaks to Star Wars, to the fact that like it did kind of in some ways get that kind of right. And the fact that people are unable to see it in their own actions and then them own selves is like kind of like wow, but like not wow at all if you get see how people are just in general. I mean, I certainly do. It's just unfortunate. It's an unfortunate look. I think if you don't know explicitly what I'm talking about, or for anyone in the audience, like,
No, I do. It's Moses Ingram.
Yeah.
And it's kind of ridiculous that Star Wars fans are okay with literally different species of characters. Like you're okay with having Wookiees and like that's believable to you, but you can't have different races of human. That's not okay. That's not realistic or believable. How does that make sense?
So I wasn't sure if I was going to talk about this or not, but I did, and I'm I think it is important to bring it up. What you just said there, that's, I think Lucasfilm themselves like echoed a statement like that. Like Ewan McGregor's own statement echoed that kind of sentiment. And I've heard other people say
Ewan McGregor did say that. Yeah.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, like that's a good sentiment and I agree with it. Like, I think that, yeah, like from a certain point of view, that's really all that needs to be said. But here's the truth.
It's believable and makes sense in any universe.
So let's go, because people have noted this. So back when there was a lot of heat around The Last Jedi, and there was, I mean, the most parallel part of that, because it was like a broad thing with the heat around that,
Right.
was this, Kelly Marie Tran getting harassed. A lot of
Right. Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, it doesn't seem like John Boyega was ever particularly harassed. I mean, mainly because, and again, this relates to where I think I want to go with this. Like, there was a sense that John Boyega was part of the party that was being wronged in the storytelling of these movies. So that even though, but if it had been the other way around, oh my God, he would have gotten it probably as bad as Moses Ingram was getting it. It shows you kind of like that there's another factor at play here, which I'm going to get to. So, I think that Lucasfilm at the time and Disney broadly didn't really put much out there about that. They didn't really acknowledge it, and they certainly didn't denounce it. I don't think that was like them being complicit towards it at all. I just think that was them actually being cowards, and being kind of like hiding behind like this veil of like, no, there's no problem here. And they've learned from that lesson they can't do that. But the problem, I think, is that they're almost like not addressing the real issue. They're not. Because I think it's very, like, don't get me wrong. Like, when you look at like what happened with Moses Ingram and the specific like DM just revealed, it's like, yeah, I think they're addressing the problem head on in terms of like, they're addressing what actually happened. I think everyone's statement is addressed what actually happened, but they're kind of ignoring the sort of long, complicated thing that's really behind this. And I don't want to belabor it too much, but I want to acknowledge it, because if we're going to talk about Star Wars at all on this podcast going forward, like, I want to make like something about it kind of clear. And I figured one of these days, though now I'm even more dreading ever doing it, like, it would make sense to revisit those sequel movies and like talk about them and talk about like, because my thoughts about them are like complicated, I think. And I kind of want to, if anything, it's like, I want to help sort it out for myself a bit more.
Well, I think you're not the only one. I think a lot of the fans have complicated feelings.
The real issue, the simplest way I can get into it, there is a sense of this sort of almost like conspiracy, essentially. Is really where, like, even if it doesn't start there, that's basically what it amounts to. There's this conspiracy that's populated by a certain, like, it's fueled by actual politics and like actual political operatives and people putting in money into these things, and a whole sort of pipeline that exists online. But the result of it is essentially, or I think a lot of it, at least as it pertains to like fandoms and Star Wars, almost like it was grafted on because people saw the opening for it. And where the opening started was, you go back to The Force Awakens. The Force Awakens comes out, and it took some, again, it seems crazy to call them risks, but they were, I guess, risks in the fact that the new generation that the story was being handed off to was a woman and a black guy, primarily. And at the time, it felt like, I don't think there was a lot of complaint about it, really. There really wasn't. It didn't seem like, so this idea that the Star Wars fandom is like...
John Boyega did get backlash. I don't want to skip over that. He absolutely did get a lot of racist.
I got to look at
especially in the UK.
I just want to say that, like, no, I'm not denying that there is zero of any of it, but like, I got to look at the timeline, because my whole thesis is that a lot of that kind of came later and was not so present from like 2013 at like 2015 or 16, like, meaning the time the casting started to like after The Force Awakens came out even. Like, I got the impression that, like, yeah, of course, there's always gonna be weird nonsense, but for the most part, it seemed like there wasn't really a narrative that was like so easy to like get people outraged or like obsessively crazy over. It basically became like this thing where it was, oh, you had these people in there, and I think people saw it, that I think so much of the attention leading up into that movie was on the old people returning. And so there wasn't as much attention to these new faces, and they were kind of given a blank slate, which I think worked in their favor, as it always should. I think people coming out of that movie, for the most part, really liked Daisy Ridley. They really liked John Boyega. They really liked those characters. And I think they were most excited about the potential. Now, there was one thing that started to emerge in the wake of that movie that plays into the rest of it. But it's like, honestly, when you look at the whole picture now, it's like kind of like the least toxic and the least like important part of it was this idea of, is Rey a Mary Sue? I remember this becoming like an internet thing where it was like this.
A Mary
no one
Sue?
no one even used that term before. But
I don't know
the
what
term
that means.
Okay. So Mary Sue, I wish I didn't have to explain this. Only because you're gonna be, I'm embarrassed to say it to you and you're gonna be like, what the hell? So Mary Sue means a female character who has extraordinary powers that are, quote, unearned or don't seem to cause any difficulty. It's like they can't do anything wrong. Basically, they do everything right the first time. They're super powerful. They face no real adversity or obstacle. So there's two sides to this equation that I just want to touch on because I'm trying to be relatively kind of succinct about talking about any of this. Like if we do a sequel pod, we'll get into that more detail. But
Yeah,
the basic,
there'll be time.
There'll be time. The basic premise though is that like the basic way I see that sort of thing is that to the extent that there ever is a quote fair or reasonable criticism, first off, take the gender thing out of there because there's definitely a male equivalent to this by definition. I think there's even a name for it, but it's irrelevant because the real truth of it, or I'll just say the equivalent thing or the thing that might be fair is, yes, I think protagonists, good writing should involve the protagonist facing obstacles. Protagonists should feel like in order to be relatable, they should feel like they have to struggle to get to the success that they have. This is just storytelling basics and not doing that.
Yeah, it makes the success less meaningful if you didn't work for it.
Exactly. And I think it's fair to critique stories that don't do a good job, balancing and managing that. Even before I get to the obvious, sexist angle and even having this term Mary Sue, is implicit to all that. I would say even still, there is probably a leniency that I think is given to male characters that is not given to female characters typically. And this really brought that out because it's not to say I kind of low key without getting into it, without revisiting it. I think the general criticism of Rey, starting with The Force Awakens, and in a lot of ways it only got way worse in the following two movies, is true. I think they did a really bad fucking job of showing Rey's development and her powers. It was really off the wall bad. So if you were just to leave it there, I would have a very genuine, honest conversation of agreement. But the issue is, of course, and even popularizing this term Mary Sue just really goes to show it. It's yeah, but there is a double standard here. Let's not be kidding. I'm sure I could point to so many male characters that have never really had any significant complaints said about them that have the same sort of writing problems there. Right. But people don't see it that way. People only see it in the female character. Now, if I was to give a little bit of a devil's advocate, and I will, there is if you're comparing Rey to Luke, which is what people would do when they would make these fucking videos being like, I've proved it. Yes, Luke, the way they wrote and demonstrated Luke had a lot more emphasis on Luke kind of being kind of choppy or struggling and having his mentors really be hard on him type shit. But there was this other character named Anakin who definitely didn't have those problems. So I'm just you see what I'm saying?
Yep.
Now,
yep,
putting all that aside, the point is that you have this Mary Sue narrative that was really about it. Even though that had a lot of toxicity to it in some senses, it was fairly mild. And I think a lot of people were well, The Last Jedi is going to fix the issue, right? Last Jedi comes out, and I really don't want to get into explaining the critiques and my own thoughts about the movie. I'll just say what I think everyone knows, which is that when this movie came out, it became pretty quickly incredibly controversial. Now, I think a lot of that controversy was built up from the exact thread that I was just referring to. It didn't seem like it had a lot to do with it because I don't think the complaints about Rey were so focused on the Mary Sue side of her at that point. I think the complaints were more about this, but they're interrelated, which is where I get into this idea of this conspiracy. is that people are like, Star Wars has, this is where this started. Star Wars has gone, quote, woke. And this is what's ruining Star Wars. The reason Luke Skywalker in this movie is not the Luke Skywalker we wanted is because Star Wars wanted to supplant him. I mean, Star Wars as in Disney and Rian Johnson, aka in this part of the fandom, Ruin Johnson. they wanted to, and Kathleen Kennedy, oh God, the female head of Lucasfilm, lightning bolt of negative attention. And the shadowy ops of Disney were conspiring to make Star Wars woke, and Rian Johnson, aka Ruin Johnson, was their bag man, and he ruined Luke Skywalker and killed everyone's childhood all over again, so that they could replace him with woke characters like Rey and Finn, even though Finn probably got the least attention on that, and Rose, and there's all sorts of others, the Admiral Holdo, all these different other little nitpicks and things, some of which, without getting into the difference in my sort of version of it versus maybe what this kind of sort of reactionary fandom conspiracy is. Yeah, like I actually have a ton of critiques of this movie and have a very complicated sense of it. But putting that aside, that was the conspiracy. And then that conspiracy became like loud. It generated, I mean, millions and millions and millions and millions of views. Like whole channels and ops and things grew out of this, like united in this hatred, this absolute hatred of what was ruining Star Wars by the woke Disney and the woke Lucasfilm. And because that happened, this is why I brought all that up. That was all just stuff to say. Because that happened, they've never really gotten rid of that sort of stink. And they're not going to be able to, because this fandom, or it's not really a fandom, this shadow fandom, this dark side of the fandom is a mark for a real like right-wing kind of like conversion machine. This is like a sort of how they get people in on this stuff, because I mean, I can point to direct evidence. There's like literally videos of people started on this and then all of a sudden they're coming out being like, I love Trump now or something. So yeah, this has been a problem.
It does kind of go along the lines with what's happening in Florida, where they're trying to say Disney's too woke because they accept gay people.
Oh yes. They're very interrelated. Yeah. No. And there's a whole complicated thing there too. But I just will say, because of that, you know, the Star Wars movies kind of have fallen apart. And then, and this is a good bridge to get into the positive stuff, which is what I want to actually talk about. But I'll say, that's kind of fell apart. And the one thing that's like kind of like reignited the fandom and even brought, I think, some of those people back towards the light. Not the worst ones. I think the ones that are the most far gone don't give a fuck, because they're not really that. I think a lot of them don't even really give a shit about Star Wars. They just love being angry and being angry at corporations and being angry at actors. Like, I mean, it's so preposterous. Those people are too far gone. But there's a lot of people that I think were not fully all the way gone, but were holding sway or giving a lot of credence, an undue amount of credence to these kinds of this kind of negativity. And I think a lot of those people have been kind of slowly brought back through because of this. Yeah.
You know what they say, trolls be trolling. They're going to find something to troll about. They're going to find something to like rant about, even if it's take it to the extreme. It's not enough to get that angry about. They're going to want to get angry about it.
So no, I agree. I mean, actually, to your point, I think this is kind of like where I was going with it, like where I think I see this most serious situation, because The Mandalorian, for whatever reasons, mostly was able to avoid this stuff. It just was a good product. I mean, I can't heap enough praise onto it. So I think that just, because it was so good and because it didn't fall into any of the pitfalls that were like the sort of trigger points for these reactionaries, so they didn't really have anything to talk about with The Mandalorian. They couldn't gin up the base and gin it all up again. And ditto goes for Boba Fett and so forth. So Obi-Wan is the first Star Wars thing we've had other than those things, really. And then there's Bad Batch, Clone Wars, but it's animated, so there's no issue ever there, really. They had, and I remember thinking before this even cast, and apparently Disney thought so too, which makes me like really scratch my head sometimes, because I'm like, okay, what did you do to get out ahead of this? Nothing. They cast Moses Ingram. They kind of like, there was like all these background memos saying they think this was going to trigger those people. And of course it kind of did. But I think what really set it off, and this is where I get into the first 2 episodes, I think there was, not in my opinion, totally legitimate or fair. Like, I think I wouldn't really, if I'm just pretending like this controversy was happening, I was just to give it an honest critique, I'd say, yeah, okay, I feel I see some roughness, but I'm not like, nothing that actually really bothers me around specifically that character, third sister.
Same.
Yeah.
Well, she hasn't really, she's still developing. We still have to
She's
see
still
stuff from her.
developing, but that didn't matter because those people that had been in wait for like 2 years while Star Wars kind of got back towards the light could not fucking hold their breath for 2 seconds. The minute there was even a little bit of blood in the water around that stuff, they started to fucking attack. And that's why what happened. So my point about even making this a critique actually of Disney and the people making this stuff is, you guys didn't really learn the lesson, it seems. Or if you did, you're not really dealing with it in a way that shows me you did. Because I don't want to give them strategy, but I think there are ways they could have legitimately gotten out ahead of this better and better reset the frame and just done a better job.
They just responded.
They just responded. They gave a response.
We love her character. And then Ewan McGregor echoed that.
Right. But that's kind of like where we started from on this whole conversation, which is just to say that, like, yeah, that's nice, but I don't think that that's good enough. That's not good enough. And it doesn't show me that you've learned anything, even if you have, because I definitely think they have. I just think that they don't want to be public about it, because if they acknowledge it, then they have to actually acknowledge that the problem is deeper than just, oh, some people are racist. That's what they want to say. They want to basically pretend the problem is some people are racist, instead of like what I think the problem actually is, which is, yeah, some people are racist, but the real issue is you have a sort of a very, 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 very toxic section of your fandom that is fueled by a toxic sort of media like sort of operation that is ready to mobilize the minute you even give a little bit towards their like concern trolling. So that's where the issue is. I guess the good news is, like, there is this deep, deep, deep excitement, not only for the rest of Obi-Wan, but just the whole sort of new next wave of Star Wars products. So some of the things that they showed off, all of which were very exciting, were they released the first trailer for Andor. Have you heard about Andor? Did you see the trailer? The Cassian Andor show with Diego Luna.
Yeah. Of course.
So that's like top of the list, and that's coming out soon. That's going to be August. So basically, like, not long after Obi-Wan's over, that's like the next big thing that's coming. They also, for on the animated side, showed off something else that I think is coming later this year, which is called Tales of the Jedi, and it's like in the Clone Wars style, and it's basically like origin stories for like more Ahsoka origin story plus a Qui-Gon Jinn origin story, where like it's like young him and Count Dooku when he was his apprentice, which is something that, like, I mean, I guess like if you've been following books and comics that I never touched, maybe you know a little bit more about, but like otherwise, like I was like, whoa, okay, yeah, it's like filling in a backstory I didn't really forgot I even needed to know. So that's going to be really cool. And there's like a lot of Mace Windu in this trailer they showed. So I was like, oh, cool. More of him. I don't know if we're getting his full origin or something, or he's just part of the other story. But that's really cool. And then there's also going to be like really kind of the big, one of the biggest news was next year, we're getting the Ahsoka show and the Mandalorian season 3, both of which seem like they're like really going hard on some of the stuff they've been setting up, but also like continuing stories from those animated shows like Clone Wars and Rebels that people are very attached to, and like finally like giving them
animated
like
Clone Wars.
I was never that. I mean, I'd seen little bits and pieces, but I never really watched the whole thing through, and I still haven't seen all of it. Like, but like I've gone back, like I was saying in my like rewatch, I got watched a lot of the like seasons 4 and 5, and then a little bit of like the last season to like specifically just go into the parts that focused on Obi-Wan. So I would like have all that context. Basically, is what I did. Because that's actually one thing I'll say about that show that's I mean, maybe it's a disadvantage in some places, but it's mostly cool and to its advantage. It's that it's kind of like, it kind of follows like a 3 or 4 episode like arc thing, which I guess is very traditional to the, like Flash Gordon's or things like that, obviously George Lucas was taking inspiration from. So I think that's really cool. And then they showed that they're the rolling production on Ahsoka, and they're literally basically, I mean, they announced one of the major characters, but it's implied almost all the characters from the Star Wars Rebel shows are going to show up in live action. The ones that are alive anyways, and even the ones that aren't, maybe in flashbacks, are going to show up in the show. Like their show is basically live action Rebels Part 2. Yeah, I mean, it's dope. And like, I mean, one of the coolest parts about it, even aside from announcements and trailers and things, was just like having all the actors there, like go out on stage and like talk about it. Like I know it's kind of like simping for now, and like at this point is like so cliche and old, but like, I mean, Rosario Dawson, I don't know. Sometimes it's like, I'm just like, this woman, it's like almost too much. It really is. But like now that she's in Star Wars and just like gets to be like she's all in. She's like, I will do this forever is what she said. So if they want to do
quit Star Wars,
I mean,
why would she ever do that?
I don't know. Like, I can't speak for everybody. Some actors don't like to get too boxed in, but she's basically implying like not universally that she wants that, but like she's very obsessed with this now. So I'm very excited for that. They revealed the actress who's playing the character Sabine is like an important character in Rebels. And yeah, going back to Mandalorian, they introduced the live action Bo-Katan in season 2. And now like, that's going to be a big part of season 3. Cause like the whole plot, which was teased in the Book of Boba Fett stuff, was like, hey, we're actually going to take back Mandalore, which again is kind of following the story as it was shown in Clone Wars and then Rebels, like this deep kind of history of like Mandalore through the Clone Wars and then the Imperial era and now in the post-Imperial era.
Well, I mean, it's the tale of a whole nother people's, of a whole nother religion. It's like a parallel to the Jedi, like what's their history?
Well, it's interesting because I never thought about it too much as a parallel to the Jedi until Mandalorian, but like the Mandalorian show, because the Mandalorian show really makes that apparent. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's very much the focus of the show, which they're almost using to their advantage, because now that you have Mando as like the Darksaber wielder, it's like he is the new Tar Vizsla Mandalorian Jedi, even though he doesn't have force powers, but he has Grogu's force powers, and you see what I'm saying. So it's almost like the two of them combined have that full skill range potentially. So that's gonna be really cool. I think that's almost what they're going for. And yeah, like I think the biggest thing,
super excited.
Obviously, before I get to the big, the Ewan Hayden reunion, which has kind of been part of the ongoing Obi-Wan press tour, which is almost better than the show itself, just because we don't even have to deal with the Vaders and the costumes and all that. You just literally get to see the two dudes just like sit across from each other in the chair and just like they were going insane during Celebration. Like, I don't know if you saw it, it became kind of a viral moment, at least in Star Wars.
I don't think I saw it when you sent it to me.
Oh, you got to see you got to see all of it. But like the specific moments at the end when the host was like to Hayden Christensen, he's like, you have anything to say to the fans before we go? And it is already like they literally couldn't get more than 2 words without people freaking out. So it was like a constant like that'll wait for everyone to stop clapping every 2 seconds. But he literally leans into the mic real hard, goes, "This is where the fun begins," and people went fucking nuts. Like, he knows, dude. That's what's kind of funny about it, is both of them, especially Hayden, but this is I bring this up to really just lead into the Obi-Wan chatter, just about the first 2 episodes, is that they really know the fans, because the fans have been talking to them for the last 20 years, and that's the reason the show is happening, is because the reason the show's happening, other than just Ewan McGregor being like, yeah, I'll do it, is because we were talking about the whole tragedy of the sequels. I mean, we really didn't talk about my like actual critiques of it, but sort of the tragedy of it's like the fandom around it. The tragedy of the prequel fandom is almost now like a footnote. it feels more and more like a footnote all the time, because what's happened is the people that love those movies who were younger now or older, they're now the base of the Star Wars fandom. And Disney knows that now. Because I think one of the mistakes they made in the sequels, it was understandable at the time, is they were trying to go so hard against the idea of the prequels. It was borderline like they wanted to make them not canon. And that I think it was fine at the time during Force Awakens, but I think over time that felt like a part of this piece of this whole narrative that I was referring to. Whereas now they've gone full tilt the other way. I think they were like, oh, I mean, part of it is just silly, corporate nonsense. Cause I think they realized after the Solo movie didn't do so well and all this other stuff, they're like, man, maybe the original trilogy's been milked too hard. Maybe we need to go to a different tap. And they picked the right project with Obi-Wan because they get to kind of like have a little bit of both. But the way they've been framing it and marketing, which I think shows me that they've learned this lesson, they've been going all in on prequel nostalgia. Like that's what I'm saying with the fun begins is like every 2 seconds, one of them was quoting a meme line from those movies because they just know that it's just going to make people go nuts. And that's what people want. And seeing them together and all that stuff, it's just like a huge part of it. And it ties in really nicely with the agenda I was just referring to, where it's like now Clone Wars and Rebels and the stuff that like Dave Filoni worked on is like kind of like considered to be the almost like the center of Star Wars narrative, more like rivaling the movies. Like, so I think all that's like kind of been an interesting sort of about face and a development compared to certainly where the Disney era started, but also just everything that preceded it, where it felt like Star Wars was kind of like almost like becoming not secondhand because it never lost its weight, but just kind of like almost like a little bit of something to poke fun at, So it's been interesting to watch it full circle. Honest to God, like because you don't have you can fully spoil everything in the first 2 episodes. I think we all know what the biggest spoiler of those is. What'd you think of the Obi-Wan first 2 episodes?
Yeah. I'm excited. I'm hearing some like negative chatter, and I think that's to be expected. But I think this is going to answer a lot of questions, fill in a lot of holes. I think for us that we've had since, truly since episode 4. It's exciting. It's kind of like tying up loose ends in a really creative way for me. I think it's obvious where it's going, but it's a really exciting place to be. I can't wait.
It's interesting you say tie up loose ends because I know what you mean, obviously, and obviously that's true. But there's a part of me that feels like, man, that was like my biggest trepidation. Is like I was like, that can be boring. And what I'll give the show credit for, even just thinking of the first 2 episodes only, like I feel like they are not totally straying away from that sort of obligation quote, but they are trying to make a real story here. They are, like, in a weird way, if George Lucas hadn't made the original trilogy, this would be episode 4. Like that's the way, I think that's the way they're trying to make it, which I think is the right call. Which is to be like, this is the next chapter of the saga. And I think, again, it plays to what I'm saying about the whole prequel, like, resurgence is it's like, yes, this is the sequel to Revenge of the Sith. Like, you're getting it. It's like, wait, we already had the sequel. We started with the sequel. It's like, no, you didn't. You didn't have that yet. Here it is. Here it is for you. It's Ewan McGregor. He's Obi-Wan Kenobi. He has to deal with what happened at the end of Revenge of the Sith now. 10 years later, boom. Which is why I think it's both perfect and surprising, because the thing I was alluding to that you haven't mentioned is this is an Obi-Wan and young Leia story. That was something they hid from all the marketing and thing. That was a total surprise. I kind of sort of almost anticipated it, like once we got right to the cusp of it. But like that cut to Alderaan was like, no. Yeah. Because as soon as they even did that, I knew this is not just going to be a one-off scene. This is what the story is now. Because even up in the first like 15 minutes of that episode, before they did that, I was kind of still in this space where it was exactly what I said I was just worried about. I was like, is this just going to be like a lot of fill in the blanks? Like I was pretty sure they'd leave Tatooine after the first episode, like going way back. I was just like, they're not going to do that after the Book of Boba Fett and a lot of the time in Mandalorian being spent there. Like they have to know better. And then they, that EW or that Vanity Fair piece came out, and it was like pretty clear that they were saying as much. So I was like, okay, they're going to leave. I'm not worried about that, but it did start to slog on me a little bit with like, and in hindsight now is like good to spend that time and get the full lay of the land. But I was very excited the second we hopped to Alderaan, not even just for Leia, but just because it meant that there was a story here that was like going to be bigger. And that was what I wanted. Now, what do you think? Because I think it's been kind of one of the talking points about our specific young Leia characterization, how she behaves, the actor, all that stuff. Like, what do you think of that? I'm very curious.
I thought she was adorable. I thought her tenaciousness fit with Leia's kind of, I don't want to say entitlement or like haughtiness, but her.
I think those
conviction.
are both appropriate.
Yeah. Her conviction.
I say that with love.
But,
yeah, conviction, for sure.
Yeah, of course. But it's kind of evident by her character from the original series that she is kind of an entitled bossy pants. And I think that this little girl nailed it.
I mean, I think especially where she starts in A New Hope, it makes a lot of sense. Because I think by the Return of the Jedi, she's quite different, actually. But like, it makes total sense with where she starts.
Echoes in A New Hope, yes, yeah, that's who she is when we meet her, right?
And low key, not that I'm saying I didn't like Leia's character arc in the original trilogy or something, or I didn't like how Carrie Fisher was playing her at the end versus the beginning. But my favorite Leia is absolutely Episode 4 Leia. There's no question about that. It's like almost like it's like one of the reasons that even though I'm like, oh, Empire is definitely the best movie, one of the reasons A New Hope's still like, even without even comparing to Empire, is already just such like a 5-star perfect movie, is because there are things in that movie that you do not get in Empire that like you're only ever going to get in that movie, I guess, which is like maybe not so much now, but like is that version of Leia specifically is one of the many things. And I love that version, who's just kind of like this, like just absolutely like trying to like get the sharp knife with the words at everybody, just kind of doesn't give a fuck, even though she obviously does. She's like putting on a front to like look tough, but it's working kind of, right? Like she's actually pissing off Tarkin, actually pissing off Vader, it's so I think it's kind of cool. And yeah, I think Vivian Lyra Blair is the name of the young actor who plays her, and just she's really good. I mean, there's some stuff in Episode 3 too where I'm like, Part 3, where I'm just like, her acting is really good. Like, it's not like it's perfect at all times, but like sometimes I have to remember too, she is still playing a little kid, not like an adult woman. But like that's kind of like the interesting part, is that then there's times where she feels like she's playing an adult woman, which is part of the characterization, and she does it kind of convincing. Like that's why I'm like, whoa, she's really good. Like she'll just get really
part of that,
and somber, and like
part of that is that she's a young princess. She's being treated like a young princess, so she has, she's like, I have to wave at people. Oh, yeah.
But actually, that was one of the most interesting little things that was in there right away, from even before she gets on the adventure, or in the second part where she's finally with Obi-Wan. Really, just the way they started with her character in the first part on Alderaan. Like one of the things that it got to that I never really thought too much about before, but I'm glad we finally, you want to speak about filling in blanks. They kind of reveal that Leia's upbringing, even as a quote princess, was particularly sheltered because, her dad, obviously knowing the whole story, was deliberately trying to protect her and hide her in plain sight, in a sense.
Overly protective. Yes.
Yeah, which again, like the contradiction or the sort of like weird, like what the fuck, that doesn't make sense part. I like how they're kind of trying to hit head on, because it was like, again, one of those weird things. It's not called a plot hole, but like what? Because like you think about it at the end of Episode 3, it's like, we're giving Leia to the Organas, who are like some of the most public famous people in the galaxy. It's like, we can get into the whole Luke with Anakin's actual,
We're gonna hide her with a super famous family. No one will ever know.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm saying. So, it's just like,
and there's rumors. She even said people say that I'm not really an Organa. She even says that.
well, I think that
and he
she's
says
always,
you are my daughter.
no, I think it's pretty clear that from what I understood that she knows she's adopted, but it's like, it's more like what you like, kind of like the subtext there of like, she believes, because this is what her parents told her, like, yes, I'm adopted, but that doesn't mean I'm not part of this family. And then other people are trying to tell her it does mean you're not part of this family. And that's always a rough thing, but she's aware she's adopted, from what I could tell. And yeah, I think that's a good thing. But I think that what I'm saying is like the interesting nuance there is that like, how does that actually work? And they don't like give you like a full explainer or detailed download, but like, it just seems like the implication is, well, we're almost using your sort of like nobility as a reason to keep you sheltered, as opposed to the other way around. Like, oh, like put her in a veil, like keep her only in events on the planet. We don't bring her off planet to do like extracurricular. She doesn't go to Coruscant. She just stays in the castle essentially. So it's kind of like a Rapunzel story, which I think is why it's important to have her kind of like always breaking out and stuff. So yeah, I think that was, and it gives a better, interesting parallel, because I think, you go back to the Luke story we're familiar with. Luke was stuck on that farm, and that was part of his whole motivation. And when we meet Leia in A New Hope, you don't really get that sense that she's stuck. I mean, at that point, it's pretty clear that she's not. And maybe by the end of this series, we'll see that she's not. But like the way it starts, at least gives you the impression like, yes, I am the princess, this or this, but I am kind of stuck. I am kind of trapped here, and I'm only allowed to go like 10, a couple hundred feet away from the perimeter. So I liked that they did that. I thought that was good storytelling. Now, I mean, I don't know. We didn't really talk about Reva or the Inquisitors from a story perspective. Maybe we don't really need to. I'm fine with it unless you have some urgent thought you want to say. I was just going to maybe close the Obi-Wan discussion for now on this point, because you can't talk episode 3.
There's going to be more.
Well, no, there's going to be more, but I definitely want to get your thought, because you haven't seen what happens next yet. Like, when you saw the ending of part 2, like, how did that make you feel?
I may have gasped.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I made a noise, but I don't know if I actually did or if I just felt like I did, but I felt like I made a noise. It's like, oh, what?
Well, here's what I'll say, because
the
shot at the end of part 2 alone does this. So I don't need to get into any shots that come later, but that's what I mean about shots. Like, it didn't even occur to me too much till I saw this, though it did. It always occurs to me. It's always kind of where my head is, actually. But I don't know. I wasn't too explicitly conscious about it. But now I have every reason to be, and I'm going to say it. One of the things that's most exciting to me about this series is what it can do visually. And I don't mean like in terms of visual effects. What I mean is, we've seen Anakin and Vader. We've seen that before, obviously. But now we get a whole new template to work with. We get to do more, and there's something about it, like, because I know as like a filmmaker, I'm like, man, what would it be like to photograph Vader? Like, what would you want to do? What have you not seen before that you could see? Like, how would you want to frame him that it captures those feelings, but maybe shows it in a different way? And there's good reason to be excited about more and more of that.